So you are a famous art collector.
I don't know about famous. I could be infamous. Could be infamous, but I don't know famous.
How did you start? How did you?
First, I describe myself as an activist art collector.
Right.
Activist, and I started back in 1968 when I was a college student at the University of Chicago, and I was majoring in chemistry, studying chemistry, but my roommate was an art major. And he came back to the room with a lithograph that he had done in class. And I looked at it and I said, oh, I like this. And I didn't know what a lithograph was. And he explained it to me, and I kind of had a sense that it had something to do with stone. And explained it to me, and I found that what he described as being very interesting. And then I said something that I now recognize was the beginning of me becoming an art collector. Because this is 1968. Don't have no money. I'm poor, black from the black side of town. So ain't got no money. And I asked him, are you selling this? And he said, yeah, I'll sell it. So we talked and we agreed on $10, which in 1968 was a lot of money. I came up with the money, I gave it to him, and I've had this lithograph that's in the front. I've had it everywhere I've ever lived. So when I look back many, many decades later, and people ask me the same question of when did you start? And I said, that's when I started. In 1968, when I asked an artist if the work was for sale and I was willing to give up my resources for something I could not eat, could not wear, could not, it was a completely different kind of a concept. It's very similar to going to the theater, is that you're spending money, it's an entertainment, so forth, but it's not an essential in a way, an economic kind of way of looking at life. It's not an essential, but when you go into the cultural side of life, it is absolutely essential. So that's when I say I became an art collector, is when I bought that piece.
But that is something that you look back in hindsight. I'm sure at that point you didn't consider yourself a collector. So when did you think, oh, actually, I'm now a collector? When did that happen?
That occurred around the year 2000. So this is okay.
I don't believe that. That can't be true. Oh my God.
Okay, definitely. When you visited, I didn't think of myself as an art collector.
I thought of you as an art collector because the place was everywhere there was art.
I know, but I didn't think of it. Is that I was deluded by a thought that, which is why I'm an activist now. I was deluded by a thought that I could not be an art collector because of what I believed. And what I believed, and I'm finding is very common, that in order to be an art collector, you have to be rich. That in order to be an art collector, you have to be very, very concerned with the privacy of your collection and security, and that you don't want other people really to see it. I believe that an art collector was somebody that had an academic knowledge of art, that knew everything about art. I believed an art collector was somebody that was very, very concerned in the investment concept of art, that art would be appreciating in value, monetary value. And if you didn't have those things, if you weren't thinking along that line or having those issues, then you weren't an art collector. And then it hit me around the year 2000 that those ideas were wrong.
How did that come about? How did that sudden Eureka moment happen?
Is that it came about when people like you and all the artists kept telling me that I was an art collector. So I had this pressure to try to look at this issue. Why do I resist this when everybody is saying that I am? And I had the Eureka moment when I made because I'm interested in culture. I mean, in the power of culture.
Obviously.
And I had a Eureka moment when I started comparing our visual arts culture to our musical arts culture. And that's when it hit me like a ton of bricks. That we, people of color, and basically almost every kind of people on the planet, we have very vibrant musical cultures. We definitely have one. And one of the aspects of it is that it is extremely egalitarian. It is not associated with wealth at all. Anybody, the poorest person all the way to the richest person, can engage in the musical culture and be a collector of it, from MP3s to 45s to LPs to 8-track cassettes. Everybody's been involved in it and been collecting it. And it is an activity, a cultural activity that inherently we want to share. You never think of having music just to yourself. You always want to share it to other people, almost instantly. The moment you hear something that you really like, you want to share it with another person. Hey, listen to this. So we don't have that privacy thing. We don't have the rich thing. And you don't need to know a damn thing about music in order to love it. You don't have to know how to play it. You don't have to know how to sing it. And so I was looking at all of these things and I said, why do we believe this over here? Yet here's another aspect of the culture. We don't have none of those thoughts. And yet this part of the culture, the musical part, is vibrant. It's exciting. And yet the visual arts culture is stayed stagnant and super elitist, which makes most people look at what is purported to be the best in the visual arts culture, and most people are scratching their head saying, I don't understand that.
I don't get it.
Yet everybody, no matter what music there is, most people can get with it. We can play some classical music down in the ghetto and so forth, and people say, yeah, I don't particularly like that, but they can understand it, and vice versa. Is that you get some really interesting hip hop, and other people that are in another part of the world, they can get it. They can understand it. Whereas the visual arts, the stuff that they say is the best, I as an avid art collector, I don't understand it. I'm like, what is this?
But that's white people, though. I mean, that's kind of European culture and sense of, what's important. And they determine that.
Let me add another aspect.
I wanted to come on to, because throughout the time you've been talking on this section, I'm thinking to myself, how do you see the collector as the person who actually places value on the art? Collecting is part of kind of giving the art value, in a sense.
Exactly.
How does that work? How does that
you hit it right, exactly, because that is exactly what we do in music. Each person out of the millions and millions of people that listen to a song and they say, oh, I like that, they are giving value to it. And that adds up when you got 1 million people listening to it and they all saying, I like that. So as the visual art collector, is that when I see something and I say, oh, I like that, and that's all I have to know is I like it. And then I look, can I afford this? And if I can, I'm gonna have it. And I'm gonna show it to other people. And they're gonna say, oh, I like that. And so we are creating the value of the things. What happens in the visual arts sort of structured culture, this high-end culture, is that they want to tell you what is good instead of you saying, oh, I like that you invested. They want to tell you what is good, and they want to tell you coming down. They want to impose this on you as opposed to you elevating it up and saying,
Right.
I kind of agree with the majority of these people that like this. So what I'm arguing for is a bottom-up visual arts culture instead of a top-down visual arts culture.
Right. Well, but I mean, the difference though is also music. You can copy and share, millions of copies. But most people's idea is that you can't do the same thing with art. I mean, yes, of course, you can create a postcard. You can do a print of the thing, and you can sell that. But it is still the original production that holds the value.
Right.
You don't really.
That's correct.
I mean, with the Beatles and people like that, the original recording might be of value, but
let me give you an example. The original performance. The original performance is of extreme value, that you were there in the room when they did this. They could be recording it, and that recording is now going off and being distributed across the world. But the original performance, that usually is one of a kind, they could never perform it that way again, is of high order.
But only if it's recorded. Only if that performance is recorded, because that performance will only live as long as the last person who saw it passes away. So in a sense, you have to record it to keep it.
But you in the theater, just think about the theater. The performance, the art is to be in that room while this thing is being performed. We also have an actual physical copy of the dialogue and so forth. That's the play. But the art is to actually be there and see that thing. And it could be tomorrow they're going to do it again.
Yes, and not as good, and not as well.
Yeah. But what I'm trying to show you is that each area of the culture has its own uniqueness about the original. And in the visual arts, it is a one-off. There is one thing, unless you have a print, a fine arts print concept, is that there can be multiples. And then we switch over to just generic reproductions of a thing.
Right.
But you have this one-off thing. But a theater performance or a dance performance is a one-off. A music performance, it's really a one-off too. So I'm seeing you, because you bring up the concept that, the visual arts are limited because there is only one, and you have to go to that spot to see it. Correct?
Yes, I'm saying that, but I wouldn't be as broad as the visual arts, because film is a visual art, and I don't mean film. I mean specifically paintings. Not even photographs, because you can always, reproduce a photo. You have a negative, assuming people use negatives these days. You can always reproduce it. But paintings, especially, is unless you copy it in some way, a photograph or a print, you cannot reproduce.
Right.
I mean, people do limited editions and they still hold their value, but they hold value because they're limited.
Right.
So,
but see, but the value that you're talking about is a monetary value. And that's nothing wrong with that. It is a monetary value. I'm looking at a cultural value. All right. One of the things, like I'm right now looking at the screen at you, right?
Yes. Yes.
And I'm looking in the background. I'm looking at this art that you got. I actually have been looking at it because I enjoy the concept of going into environments where I am seeing the visual arts that the person has said, this is what I like. This is just like going into their home and they start putting on some music and they're exposing you to something you have never heard before. And you say, this is what Paul likes. I'm believing that in the visual arts, that we should think of the experience of going into and seeing what somebody else likes is the same as being in their environment and hearing what they like. Now, that's a value.
I hear you. I understand.
That's a value.
Yeah.
And
I guess that's what white people think about the museums that they create. You know, they're putting out the things that they think are important. The British Library or wherever else you might go.
Exactly. And it's a stayed kind of thing where it is collected from collectors and brought to preserve. No, okay?
Right.
And I'm not going to argue that human beings shouldn't do that. But I'm arguing for what you have right now and what I have and what could be in the people that are across the street and in the schools and in the houses of faith. Everybody could have art collection all the time. We should be walking into them all the time. And that would be giving it a cultural value. Is that the businesses, instead of just having just art, prints and stuff, put up real art. Let people see that. Have murals out there so that people can see the art, the artistic creation of the culture.
And you're also elevating the artist in the same process. So it does also have an economic consequence.
It does.
Because you're placing greater value on this thing that you are collecting, not just you as an individual, but the community collects, and then you elevate the artist as a process.
But one of the things that this conversation is kind of going to eventually going to go to is that the visual arts are going to speak about the things, the subjects that you think are important. Yeah. And so that's important to get that out there, to have it. My house is a testament to what I like. And I like men. So I'm going to have a lot of that in here, and you got to deal with that. But
and how do people deal with that? How do people deal with that? Because
they do it. Very easily.
And I know your collection has probably grown quite a bit since I was in your previous apartment. And I mean, there were some beautiful, quite erotic images that I would see and bump into at the least, expected time. I could be sat on the loo and I might look up and there'll be, maybe some genitals, and you don't see it immediately. But when you have some time to contemplate, you're like, damn, that's somebody's balls. How do people? Because I know you have schools and you have students and men and women coming through your apartment looking at you. How do they respond?
It's amazing. One, people see what they want to see. And when you have an interest in presenting what you really like, and if you're not essentially trying to just be pornographic, it will not come across that way. They will not see it or feel it that way. I ask all the time when the tourists come into my bedroom, which I tell them, I said, the theme in this bedroom is about sensualities. It's about all the different ways in which human beings are sensual and how they interact. And they have to look, because even though it's right in their face, it's some serious shit right in their face. They don't get that feeling as when you have it structured around pornography and so forth. It's about sensualities. And so they deal with it. No problem. Little kids and so forth.
I also think because you're not ashamed of it, that also has an impact. That also lets them understand how they should perceive it and view it, because there's no shame attached to it from the presenter of the works.
Yeah, that's correct. I think that has a big play. But I also believe that you have to direct the eye for people. Most people are only looking surface. They're not really. You have to. When they come to my house, I have to point out some stuff, and then they'll see it, and sometimes they'll clutch their pearls. You're like, oh, I didn't know that, because they don't see it. Is that it's right there in your face, and you just don't see it. So,
what was
huh?
Go. I was going to ask a question, but you.
It to me, it's fascinating watching how people perceive things, and I find that a lot of people put things out so blatant that it actually makes them turn off, and they don't see it. Also, I have seen over my years, because now, you know, I've been a highly sexual person. I've done all kinds of things in life. I'm not ashamed of those things. But I have found that pornographic imagery has an immediate impact, but not a lasting impact. Is that you tend to get bored with it real quick. You don't particularly like to look at it continuously. It has it's like a bam, and then it pulls back and it's gone.
Yeah.
Whereas a sensual image lasts forever. You can look at a sensual image every day of the year, and it is still always, yes, essential. So I think a lot of times, especially in our world, men tend to put things that are just so blatantly, what I would say, pornographic. It's about the act so blatant that it doesn't appeal for the long term. It doesn't get people excited about looking at it again and again and again. Whereas the people, when I bring them in here and I start showing them stuff, and they still want to look at it, even though I know they're clutching their pearls inside, you know. Like, oh my God.